Now, Joan, we started last week this big chapter, which is looking at building a high performance team. And in all my excitement, I started talking about it, of course, with my colleagues. So right away, one of them says, "You need to coach me." I said, no, you need to go get a book. You need to go get the book and read it for yourself. I'm not yet there to coach you. But nonetheless, we started developing the team charter. So right away, we put it into practice already. And the team charter is as a guide. It's truly as a guide that guides the performance of the team. All agreed, the agreed values upon which we're developing this team once we identify what they are. And so I want to move on to looking at some of those things that would cause that team to be dysfunctional. And how can we resolve those dysfunctions? So where can you take me where that's concerned? Because it is bound to happen, as we say.
Oh, absolutely. Even high performing teams have to deal with these specific challenges. And what the model that I use is from Patrick Lencioni's Five Dysfunctions of the Team. It's a best-selling book, fantastic book, easy read, and life-changing when it comes to team dynamics. So, as the name suggests, there are five dysfunctions. The first one, a lack of trust. If you don't have trust in your team, and Pearson, we've been talking about trust since we started this journey.
Yes.
If the members of the team don't trust each other, and this is not just about you as a leader, they need to trust you for sure, but there also needs to be trust within and between members of the team, or else you cannot be high performing. So that's the first one. And the thing is, it's like a downward slide with these dysfunctions. Because if you don't have that trust within the team, then people are going to be reluctant to engage in constructive conflict.
Right.
Right? Right? They're going to be reluctant to be vulnerable. And so if you have in your meetings, Pearson, and this reminds me of something that you shared last week. If in your meetings it's really quiet or everybody just seems to be agreeing, and you're assuming they're agreeing because they're quiet, that doesn't mean that you have genuine agreement. There may be a fear of engaging in conflict.
Right.
Right? So you get this false impression that people are on board. However, because they're not genuinely on board, because they didn't engage in conflict, hear their views, work it through, then they don't want to have a decision is taken. So like last week, when you told us about going into your meeting with your preconceived notions and either dragging or pushing the people to get to the point where you needed them to be. If they don't articulate a commitment, you may think, all right, we're good to go, we're moving forward. And then you notice, oh, hold on a second. People are not doing what I told them or what we agreed we were going to do. Yes. And what you have there, you then seek to hold them accountable. And they say, but we agreed. Remember, we had this meeting and we agreed. And if they feel brave enough, they say, we agreed. We remember you telling us something.
True.
But I don't know about the we agreed part. So they're not prepared to be held accountable to the decision because they weren't part of it. They never really committed to it. And then that brings us to the fifth dysfunction, the inattention to results. Because if I never committed, you can't hold me accountable. Therefore, you're not going to get the results that you need. And so you can't have a high performing team. So lack of trust, all right, fear of conflict, the lack of commitment, the lack of accountability, and ultimately the inattention to results would be the primary dysfunctions.
So how do I get it to perform correctly? I mean, how do I get each of them to love each other? First of all, to trust each other. How do I get them to start there so that I have my high performing team?
Okay, so we go back to the chapter we did in terms of managing others, where we looked at the building blocks of relationships. And Pearson, they don't have to love each other, they just need to respect each other.
Yes.
They need to have empathy for each other. They need to have open and effective communication. And they need to realize that people are not clones of them. So the platinum rule needs to be enforced as right. So trust has to be built. And remember, we had an entire chapter on trust. So you need to show up as being competent. You need to show up as being of good integrity. You need to show up as genuinely wishing your people well, and you need to be consistent with that. So it can't be a cloak, that an outer garment that you put on and take off. It has to be authentic, it has to be genuine, and it has to be the competency consistently evident in how you show up.
Yeah, and again, time has always been right through all of this, folks. You can't rush the brush, as we would say, because then you'll spoil the art. So you have to develop the time, the sensitivity, and the patience for these things to build. Fear of conflict. I agree with you that oftentimes we sit there, we figure, well, as they're silent, clearly there's no contention. So, all seems to be well. And I don't want to touch on this subject because if I touch on it, I know it's going to trigger a nerve. And to avoid that, let's pretend it doesn't exist. But then there's some people in the group who say, no, we have to deal with the elephant in the room. And that meeting can become quite raucous and disruptive, can't it?
Absolutely. But here's where the charter comes in handy. Because in your charter, you would have stipulated how you deal with conflict, right? Because what type of team do we want to be? How do we want to engage each other? And so if you have that foundation in your charter and things start going off the rails, then you remind them, okay, folks, this is not how we decided we would engage each other. So let's remember our core values, let's remember our charters, and let's deal with this conflict in a way that's consistent with what our charter said, who our charter says that we are.
When I identify someone who shows a lack of commitment, do I just kick them off the team? Should I counsel them? Do I beg them to come back? Or do I just move on and pretend they don't exist?
All right, so it depends, as so many things do. Because if you have someone who has over a period of time shown that this is how they show up, then at some point you may want to say, okay, does this person fit the team? But at some point, that's not where you start out. Because remember, as the leader, it's your responsibility to meet people where they are and help them to get to where they need to be. So if the person is not committed, it requires you engaging them in order to ascertain what the impediment is. Because it may be something, and we have a way of holding on to some old hurts, and sometimes we're holding on to the thing for so long we can't even remember the specifics of the original incident, but we just know that we hurt and a time ago, and people here not nice, and if you think they're good, right? So it's important to help them to strip away some of that to get back into the focus. And again, coming back to the team charter and your purpose. Is this a purpose that you support? Do you want to be a part of delivering on this purpose? If so, this is what is required of you. Can you step up to the plate and do this? Or do we need to start making some other decisions?
We're talking about shifting cultures, though, in all of this, because if the culture you walked in on was A, and you want not to shift it to B, then it's going to require a complete shift in the way we approach things, which is also where accountability falls into play, because oftentimes you'll hear it, that a lot of the reasons why a lot of our businesses fail is because there's been a little attention to accountability, holding people responsible for what they agree to be responsible for. And that is such one of those little wood ants that would get into the house, that would decay the house in a second if you don't pay attention.
Absolutely. And you mentioned culture.
Yeah.
And I want to make a slight detour to talk about culture here, because it's very easy for people in middle management, for frontline managers, to point to the culture as an excuse why things are not going the way that they should be or that they would like them to be. And I want to push back on that and challenge on that. Because culture doesn't exist just at one level. So you have the entire organizational culture. Let's refer to that as the macro culture. So CBC has a macro culture, which that's set above your pay grade, Pearson. Okay?
Yes.
However, below that, you have what we can refer to as the subculture. So within departments, the leaders of those departments have the opportunity to set their culture by virtue of their leadership. So that's the subculture. And even at the next level down, within the individual teams within a department, you have the microculture, which
Yes.
again flows from the tone set by the leadership. So you mentioned in a previous episode that you have like 3 different radio stations that you're responsible for. So if we
Yes.
put all 3 together, you would have a subculture there across your stations, right? Based on how you show up as the leader. But then within each of those, there's a microculture because there are leaders within each of those stations that their shadow helps to determine how the culture exists within there. So
Right.
don't just say, oh, within this organization, the culture is X. You, as a leader, wherever you fall within that hierarchy, you influence your level of the culture.
Because then you lead us to cliques. There will be cliques that will form in these subcultures all the way down, and those cliques can be quite formidable, and you can't turn your eyes away from them. And those are some of the things that would disrupt any high-performing team.
Exactly. So we come back to the charter again, right? This is why, as you say, it takes time to do the work, but it's such important work because of the foresight that you need to anticipate the difficulties you're going to experience and plan for them. So yes, I mean, human nature, we gravitate towards certain people more than others. Like me and you gel. I'm not saying that I feel the same way about everybody else. But the thing is, there's nothing wrong with having a special relationship with one or more persons as long as it doesn't have an adverse impact on how you engage with the others, right? It's when the arrogance and the exclusivity start to creep in, when you start excluding people from what you're doing, that it can become problematic as it relates to the work. So if all you want to go movies, in the days when you were going to movies, where you and you don't invite me, okay, I can get over that. But don't exclude me on the job. Don't exclude me when I am part of the work process.
Yes. John, the time is up. I cannot believe it. But listen, we have to move on. It's still in this chapter. Next week, we're going to look at team roles and responsibilities. Those are also a critical function of the best performing teams. So we'll look at that a little bit more detail again next week. But folks, such wonderful, wonderful gems in this book. As always, Joan, thank you so much for joining us and inspiring my spirit to take on today in a new way as well. Thank you, Joan.
Thank you as well. Bye-bye.